Long before there was a Christmas, that is, long before the Holy Babe was born in Bethlehem, pagan peoples in the north of Europe held a month-long midwinter festival, and strangely enough, and they called this the Yuletide, and many of the customs connected with this festival are reflected in our own Christmas celebration. These people worshiped the sun, and as the days grew shorter and darker and colder, they feared that the god was displeased with them and was leaving and might not come back. And so they built huge fires to show that how much they appreciated the warmth and the light of the sun. And they slaughtered their flocks, and they had a great feast, and they poured the blood of the horses and the cattle about the roots of some tree that they chose in the forest to represent their god. And on this tree they fastened many things which they thought they came to them from the sun. Flowers and vegetables and fruit and so on. They thought, too, that every bush and tree which remained green during the cold of winter must be especially favored by the god. And so they would cut down these branches and bring them into their homes, thinking thereby to bring the blessing of the god into their home. Now, the early Christian missionaries discouraged all pagan practices, but this particular one seemed harmless enough, and so they called that custom bringing in Christmas. The favorite green, of course, was the holly, and they called it the holy bush, and they said that originally the berries were white. But when holly was used for the crown of thorns for the Savior, the berries were stained by the drops of blood upon the Savior's brow and became red. And thus it is that red and green are the old Christmas colors. And perhaps, too, this accounts for the Christmas wreath, which originally was always made of holly or evergreen. And today we make it out of most anything, from lollipops to toilet tissue. The early church fathers frowned upon the mistletoe because they said it made the young people think too much about kissing and love-making and all that sort of thing. Have you ever wondered why we kiss beneath the mistletoe? Well, mistletoe is a parasite and grows on another tree. And when the sun worshippers saw all the leaves drop off from a tree, and there, high in the branches, there was a mistletoe with its bright green leaves and its lovely pearly berries, they thought this was especially blessed by the sun, and they called it all heal, and they attributed to it many powers of healing. And they also called it the peace plant, because no one was allowed to draw a sword beneath the bough that bore the mistletoe. And at a certain time, with great ceremony, they cut down these branches, little sprigs of it, to put over the doorway of their homes. And this meant, of course, that no enemy could enter there. The visitor, to show that he was peaceful, extended his hand, palm upward, to show that he had no weapon. And his host would grasp his hand gratefully, and that, we are told, is the origin of the hand-clasp of friendship. And from that, it was just a step to the kiss beneath the mistletoe. And tradition also tells us that when a maiden stands shyly, coyly, accidentally and on purpose underneath the mistletoe, the gentleman must give her not only a kiss, but a berry from the branch, because no berry, no luck. And this is the story that accounts for that. Freya, the mother of the sun god Baldur, dreamed that he was going to be killed by an arrow. So she asked all of the trees to promise not to furnish wood for that purpose, but she forgot to ask the mistletoe. And Loki, the god of darkness, discovered this, and he had an arrow made of mistletoe, and he caused his blind twin Hedda to shoot an arrow in just as Baldur was passing by. And when the wounded Baldur fell to the ground, his mother bent over him and wept bitter tears, which turned into these lovely pearly berries, and then thus they became, you see, the emblem of everlasting love. Perhaps you've heard of the little boy who told his mother that he had learned a new Christmas carol about the atomic bomb. His mother said, "Oh, no, don't tell us that we have to have the atomic bomb in Christmas." But when he began to sing the song, she recognized the old carol of O Tannenbaum, O Tannenbaum, which is the German for O Christmas Tree. There are many stories about the origin of the Christmas tree, but one of the best loved is the story by Henry Van Dyke called The First Christmas Tree. It tells how the great missionary St. Boniface, traveling with his companions through the woods of northern Germany one Christmas Eve, came upon a group of people taking part in a Yuletide ceremony. They had kindled a great fire. They had poured the blood of horses and of cattle about the roots of the tree which they had chosen to represent their God, and they had tied thereon things to represent the sun god's gifts to them, fruit and vegetables and so on. Also, they had tied to this tree animals and birds, live animals and birds, which fluttered about and gave the tree a very exciting aspect. As they stood there, the old man of the tribe stepped forward and said, "Tonight one of us must go to the hall of the gods and plead for the return of the sun." And placing his arms around a slender sunbeam of a lad, he said, "Bernhard, will you go for us tonight?" And Bernhard didn't understand, of course, what it meant, but he said, "I will go." And he was blindfolded and bade to kneel before the old man, who took up a huge stone hammer and was about to crash it down upon his head, when Boniface, with a shout, rushed in, and with his stout staff he pushed the hammer to one side, and then, leaping upon a great rock, so that all could hear and see, he said, "This tree and all it stands for has no power over you. Wait, I will have my men cut it down." Oh, the people shivered with fear as that great oak crashed to the ground. They wondered what would happen, but nothing did. And then Boniface said to them, "There is no sun god, there is only one God, and that is the great All-Father. And this is the birthnight of his Son, and I have come to tell you about him." And then, pointing to a young fir tree standing near, he said, "If you want a tree to remind you of your God, take this one, which is evergreen, symbolic of the everlasting life. This tree whose every branch points upward as if to point your thoughts to higher things. This tree on the end of every branch bearing a cross, a symbol of God's love for all his children. And don't go out in the dark and the cold with bloody sacrifices. Cut this tree down, take it into your home, and there where it is warm and light, sing carols of praise unto your God, and gather the children round, and tell them the stories of the Holy Babe about the tree of the Christ child." When the Christians began to have trees in their homes, they decorated the trees with them symbolic of God's gift to them. Round golden balls suggesting the sun, and silver ones for the moon, and clear ones as clear as crystal, which looked like the raindrops, and fruit and vegetables, nuts, popcorn, cranberries, all this food which God sends to us. And when they put fishes on the tree, they thought not only of food, but of the fish as the very first and earliest symbol of our Lord. Some ornaments were mounted on springs, too, to remind us of those wild and live things that the early pagans tied up on their tree. There are stories about all of these birds, how the robin got his red breast as he fanned the fire to keep the baby warm, how the stork went to see the baby, and, distressed by the scratchy straw all about him, plucked down from her own breast to make a soft pillow for his head. And when you see the peacock, and you always see a peacock on every Christmas tree, you remember how long ago peacock pie, baked in a deep dish and all decorated with plumage, was the special dish of the Christmas dinner in England. Of course, every tree in a Christian home will have a shining star at the top. Not red or blue, but just as near like a real star as is possible, reminding us of the star that shone o'er Bethlehem. And right beneath the star should be an angel, probably one that's been in the family for a long time. In one family, the same angel has had this place of honor for over 60 years. She was on the first Christmas tree of the first child born in that home. And now the great-grandchildren always look for the mangy angel, as they call her, for naturally, after all these years, she's somewhat the worse for wear. It would seem to show that even the angels lose their hair and their complexion as they grow older. There will be other angels on the tree, too. Angels playing upon all sorts of instruments, for everything at Christmas should make a joyful noise unto the Lord. There should be perhaps one angel that would remind the children of the story of the angel with an apron full of stars. She had gathered the star flowers, so the story goes, to take a gift to the Christ child. But as she journeyed to the stable, she met so many needy and sad, unhappy, poor people that and sick, of course, and that she gave to all of them some of her stars. And when she arrived at the manger, she just didn't have any left for the Christ child. And she said to Mary, and she told Mary what had happened, and then she said, "So I have no gift for him." But Mary said, "Any gift that is given from a loving heart to those less fortunate is a gift to him, really." And we remember that when Jesus was a man, he did say that whatsoever ye do unto the least of these my brethren, ye do it unto me. Perhaps you will have an angel sitting in a moon and looking rather sad. Well, that is Thaddeus. Thaddeus sang with the angel choir, but he always sang off key. And so it was on the night when the angels were going to sing to the shepherds. They said, "Thaddeus, you cannot go." And he felt so sad he went and sat in the moon and sulked. And the angels, seeing him there, felt sad too, and they said, "Oh, Thaddeus, you may come, but don't sing, just watch." And he watched so hard that he didn't notice when they went back to heaven. But he did notice when the shepherds began to talk and say, "Well, there are no angels here. Perhaps we just dreamed that. There probably is no babe in Bethlehem after all." But then Thaddeus began to sing, and he sang with all his heart. And in spite of the fact that he was off key, he told of the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes which they would find in Bethlehem, and off went the shepherds across the pastures to find the babe. We will have angel hair on the tree. Lametta it is sometimes called, but if used on the tree, it should be used sparingly and pulled apart till it's like a mist or a spider web. Spiders on the Christmas tree? Oh, yes, indeed. And spiders, too. Long, long ago, a good German house mother cleaned her house from top to bottom and to make everything all grand and clean for the Christ child. And then she trimmed the tree and put it in a certain room and locked the door so that no one should see it before it was time. Of course, the house creatures saw it. The kind old house dog had looked at it with his big brown eyes, and the mother kitty with her green eyes, and the little gray kitty with her starry blue eyes. Even a little mouse with beady black eyes peeked out one peek from the corner, but when he saw the cats, he went right straight back. But there were some of the house creatures who had not seen the tree, the little gray spiders. You see, this woman cleaned as almost no one cleans today. And after she dusted and scrubbed, she took her broom and she went poke, poke, poke into all the corners, and poke, poke, poke here and there, and the poor dear spiders had to run for their lives, way down in the cellar and way up in the attic. But on the night that the Christ child came to bless the tree, here they came, creepy, creepy, creepy up the cellar stairs, and creepy, creepy, creepy down the attic stairs, and creepy, creepy, creepy down the great long hall until they came to the Christ child, and they said, "Dear Christ child, you know how domestic we are. You know how we love every nook and cranny in this house, and we've been literally cleaned up, and we have not seen the tree. All the other house creatures have seen them, but we who are so domestic have not seen it." "Well," said the Christ child, "come in, and look to your heart's content." Well, at first they went around the tree on the floor, but you know yourself that you're a spider. You couldn't get a very good look at the tree from the floor. And so presently they went into the trunk of the tree, and they climbed clear to the top, and then they let themselves down to this branch, and they looked at everything around here, and then they let themselves down to the next branch until they'd seen everything on the tree. And they thanked the dear Christ child, and away they went, way down cellar and way up in the attic. And then the Christ child turned to bless the tree. And as he looked, my dears, that tree was covered with cobwebs. And he knew how that good old clean house mother would think about that. But he smiled, and he blessed the tree anyway. And all those cobwebs turned into gold and silver, lovely festoons that made that tree more wonderful and beautiful than it had ever been before. And so from that day to this, when we trim our tree, we put on some of these festoons, and we pray that the Christ child will come and bless our children and all the creatures in our home. And we put some spiders on the tree because we know that every home will blessed be that has a spider on the tree. Perhaps you would even have a kitten on your tree. You know, the animals came first, and they tell us that on that first night when the baby began to cry, they all crowded around. They couldn't understand what was going on. Mary and Joseph had tried their best to quiet the babe, and they couldn't. The doves had said coo, coo up in the rafters, and the old ox said moo, moo, but that only frightened the baby. He cried worse than ever. And then the kitten said, "Let me try." And he crept up close to the baby's head, and he began to purr and to purr and to purr until the baby went fast asleep. But all the time that he was purring, Mary was looking at the kitten's paws, which were very, very dirty, for he'd been playing out all morning in the dirt. And he was very conscious of this. So as soon as the baby was asleep, he got down and he went outside, and he began to wash his paws, and he's been washing them ever since. Of course you'll have lambs on the tree because of the story of the shepherds and the lambs and the sheep. And there's a lovely story by Francoise that's called Noel for Jean Marie. Jean Marie was a little French girl, and she had a little lamb that she played with just as you do with your dolls. She called him Patapon. She put him in the doll carriage, and she talked to him. One day she said to him, "Patapon, you know that Noel is coming pretty soon, and I shall put my shoes near to the fireplace, and on Christmas Eve, Father Christmas will come, and he will put some presents for me in those shoes." And Patapon said, "Well, I have 4 shoes, but none of them come off, so I suppose I won't get any presents." And then Jean Marie said, "Perhaps I'll get a beautiful scarf, all with pink dots on it. Perhaps I'll get a—" "But," said Patapon, "I probably won't get anything, 'cause I haven't any shoes." Well, this made Jean Marie think. She went to the shoemaker, and she had him make a little pair of shoes for Patapon. And she put them right beside her own on the hearth. And Christmas morning, when they went to look, there in Patapon's shoes, there was a lovely little wreath and a little bell to put about his neck. And he was so happy with those. They put the wreath about his neck, and he had the little bell attached to it. And he jumped, and he made the bell ring as he shouted, "Noel, Noel, Noel, Noel," to everyone that passed. In a little village in Austria far across the sea, in the old church of St. Nicholas, there once lived a little mouse. We'll call this mouse Casper the church mouse, because he did live in a church. Casper just loved his home, and he loved music. He loved to practice with the choir. At least he thought he was practicing with the choir. He could imagine himself as a little choir boy. I have one. And also he liked to listen to Hans Gruber when he was practicing on the organ. And he liked, too, the little crumbs that fell from Hans Gruber's lunch, which he always brought with him. But one day Hans Gruber said, "This organ is getting to be too bad. I will not practice here any more. Unless someone comes to fix this organ, we will not have any Christmas music this year." And he didn't come back after that for a long, long while, and poor Casper thought he would starve to death. And then he remembered that one day his mother had said that she kept herself alive for a long while by chewing on a leather shoestring. Well, there were no leather shoestrings in the church of St. Nicholas, but Casper remembered that the bellows which were behind the organ and which made the organ play were made of leather, and he went and he chewed on one for a little while. Oh, it was very dry and very hard and tough, but it did keep him alive, and for several days that's all that he had. And then one day Hans Gruber came, and he sat down once more, and he said, "I suppose I'll have to try once more." But, my dears, no sound came from the organ at all. You see, all those holes that Casper had made in the bellows made them no good at all. Then Hans Gruber said, "Well, I'll just have to go and tell Father Moore that we'll have no Christmas music this year," and off he went. Well, that night, quite late, Father Moore came into the church, and Casper always crept near to hear the prayers that he said. But this night, as Father Moore knelt at the altar, instead of saying a prayer, he was saying, "Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. Oh, I must go and tell Hans Gruber to make some music to go with those beautiful words." You see, as Father Moore had been coming to church that night, he had first been to call on a very sick lady, and he had noticed as he walked along the streets the beautiful stars and the quiet that was over this little village, and he thought, why, it must have been just like this over Bethlehem. And that's what had made him think of these beautiful words. He started off for Hans Gruber's house, and Casper went right along after him. And when they arrived there and the door was opened, Casper slipped into the house quickly and right out into the kitchen where Mrs. Gruber was making cookies. And he was just having a wonderful feast when he suddenly heard Father Moore say, "I must go now, but you must promise me to make some music to go with these words." And Hans Gruber said, "Well, I'll have to play on the guitar because the organ simply will not play." But Christmas Eve, all the people came as usual for the service. They were used to sing some carols before the service began. But this night Father Moore came out, and he said, "We cannot sing carols with the organ tonight because the organ is broken. It's out of repair. But he said, Hans Gruber and I have a surprise for you. Hans will play up on the guitar, and together we will sing for you a new carol which I hope you will like." And he began to sing, "Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright." And the people listened. They were very sad at not having their choir sing, but they just loved this carol. And pretty soon they were all singing with him, "Silent night, holy night." And as they left that church that night, they were talking together. How do you suppose he happened to write that carol? And then someone spoke up and said, well, if it hadn't been for that mouse, we could have had our choir sing just as usual. And someone else said, oh, I think we should say thank you and Merry Christmas to that little mouse, because if it hadn't been for him, we wouldn't have the most beautiful carol in all the world. And there are many, many people who still think that that is the most beautiful carol in all the world. I hope you have a donkey on the tree, because I always think of that story of Small One, the little old donkey that belonged to the woodcutter. He was getting too old to do any work, and so the woodcutter gave him as a pet to his son Pablo, and Pablo just loved him. But one day the woodcutter said, Pablo, that donkey is eating his head off. That means to say that he was eating more than he was worth. And he said, you take that donkey in town, and you take him to the tanner. He isn't any good, you can't sell him for anything, but the tanner will give you a piece of silver for his hide. Oh, said Pablo, you don't mean to kill Small One. Never mind, said his father, you take him to the tanner, he'll know what to do, and don't come back without that piece of silver. So Pablo sadly went into town. He tried every way to sell the donkey, but nobody wanted him. And finally, as the shadows were lengthening, he started for the tanner's house, because he knew he had to have that piece of silver before he went home. And then, just as he was nearing to the house, a man spoke to him, and he said, you wouldn't want to sell that donkey, would you? And Pablo said, oh, yes, indeed, I would love to sell this donkey. Well, said the man, I am going on a long journey, and my wife isn't very well, and she can't walk that far. And I would like to have a donkey for her to ride on, but I can't pay very much money. And Pablo said, oh, only one piece of silver, that's all you have to pay. And Pablo is so sure and so steady, oh, he's just the one that you want. And so it was that the man bought Pablo and bought the Small One, and Pablo went along with him to see the lady placed on the donkey's back. He even went to the city gate to say his last farewell. And there he threw his arms around the donkey's neck, and he said, oh, Small One, don't look so sad. I shall miss you so, but when I am a man, I'll earn some money and I'll buy you back. And go steadily and carefully and carry the lady so carefully, won't you? And then with a sob in his throat, he turned and ran back toward his own home. And then a soldier at the gate said, come, 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 it's time to close these gates. Who are you and where are you going? And the man said, I am Joseph, and this is my wife Mary, and we are journeying to Bethlehem. To most children, Christmas and Santa Claus go together. Santa Claus' real name is St. Nicholas, and St. Nicholas was a real person. He was a bishop who lived in Syria, or in Lystra, a long time ago, and he was a very rich man, but also a very good man. And he had a friend, a nobleman, who had been wealthy but who had lost all his money, and he had 3 daughters. They were all anxious to be married, but they had no dowry. And St. Nicholas thought he would take care of that. by climbing up a tree and getting onto the roof of the house late at night and dropping a bag of gold down the chimney. And this he proceeded to do, and they didn't know where the money came from, and so they accepted it, and the first daughter was married. He did that once again, and the second daughter was married. But the third time that he did this, the nobleman had come in from a walk, and his feet were cold, and he took off his stockings and hung them by the fireplace to dry. And as he sat there in the dark, kerplunk, down the chimney there came a bag of gold and landed right in his stocking. And he ran out, and he caught St. Nicholas. And he thought it was such a good joke that he told everybody about it. And the result is that everybody began to hang up their stockings, hoping that St. Nicholas would drop something into theirs. And because of this story, the 3 golden balls came to be a symbol of St. Nicholas. Sailors who sailed upon the sea liked to have the 3 golden balls fastened to the mast because they felt that St. Nicholas would keep them from all harm. And when they went into the city, you know sailors are great hands to spend their money, and they used to have to borrow money to see them through. And so the owners of the boats used to hang out 3 golden balls over their special store so that the sailors would go to the right place to borrow their money. So St. Nicholas is the patron saint of children and of lovers and of sailors and of pawnbrokers. The St. Nicholas in Holland comes dressed in a bishop's robe and riding on a white horse. And he goes to each house, and believe it or not, he catechizes them. He asks them for answers in their catechism. And if they can make good answers, he leaves some presents for them. If not, his little black servant leaves just a bundle of sticks. The Hollanders also called St. Nicholas Sinterklaas. And when they came to America, they settled in New York. They called it New Amsterdam. And they brought their Sinterklaas with them. And over here he became Santa Claus. As the patron saint of Russia, he had lost his bishop's robes and was wearing a fur coat and a fur-trimmed coat and was driving reindeer and so on. And in America, a cartoonist drew a picture to illustrate the poem which we call The Night Before Christmas, which tells about St. Nicholas going through the air driving his reindeer. In the Scandinavian countries, they look for their gifts from the Tompte, or the Nisse, as he's sometimes called. The Tompte is a little elf-like man who lives in the barn in the summertime, but in the wintertime he moves into the house and lives up in the attic. And on Christmas Eve he expects the people to leave some of their Christmas dinner for him. Jacob Riis tells how in his home they always put a dish of rice pudding on the attic stairs. And they put the cat up there, too, to keep him company, because I told you he's very fond of animals. And in the morning the pudding was all gone, so they knew that he enjoyed it. We see him riding on a pig sometimes, or sometimes in a sleigh. But the real way that the Tompte goes is on the Yule buck. The Yule buck is that straw goat that we see so often in our Christmas decorations. The story is told of a poor woman who had told her children the story of the Tompte and of the Yule buck. And they, of course, like we like to see Santa Claus and the reindeer, they wanted to stay up and see the Tompte and the Yule buck. But she told them they couldn't. But after they'd gone to sleep, she went out into the barn and took some straw and made a straw goat. And this she put out in the moonlight, and then she woke them up and she said, "Now come quickly and go back quickly so that the Tompte won't catch you. And I think you can catch a glimpse of the Yule buck." And so they did, and they were so delighted when they had seen that, and they made so much of it, that every year after that, well, every year since then, there's been in every home in Scandinavia, you will see a Yule buck at Christmas time. In many countries, they celebrate what they call Old Christmas. We call it Epiphany, January the 6th or the 12th night. In Russia, they expect their presents to be brought to them on this night by a little old woman called Babushka. Babushka, it is said, lived along the road where the wise men traveled, and when they arrived at her home, they asked to stay there for the night. And they showed her the gifts that they were taking to the Christ child, and they urged her to come with them. And she said that she would love to go, but she was a kind of a housekeeper that washes on Monday and irons on Tuesday and does whatever you're supposed to do on Wednesday, and she would not leave her house unless everything was in perfect order. So she said when she'd cleaned up her house and picked up a few gifts for the baby, she would catch up with them. But she never did catch up with them. And in Russia, the children put their jackets over the back of a chair with the pockets turned inside out to show that they're empty. And there they expect their presents to be brought to them by Babushka, who has given up catching up with the wise men. In Spain, they think the wise men come riding on horses, and so they put some shoes out on the windowsill with some wisps of straw in for the horses. But the most interesting of all these Epiphany stories, or these old Christmas stories, is the one that tells the one that they expect to bring their gifts to them in the land of Syria, the place where Jesus himself grew up as a little boy. When the wise men decided to follow the star, they wanted to take the very strongest camels that they had, for they knew it was likely to be a long journey. And when they went out to get them, they found out that one of the camels, which was especially strong and good for long journeys, had a little baby calf camel. A calf camel cannot be separated from its mother until it's a year old, or it will die. So they didn't know what to do, but after a while they decided that coming of so strong a race, it probably would stand the trip. And so they let the little baby camel travel along beside its mother. The story is long and tells how when they crossed rivers, the camel had to be strapped on his mother's back, and they tell of all the long and weary journey and the many thoughts the poor little camel had as he tried to keep up with the older ones. But finally they arrived in Bethlehem. Then the older camels dropped down quickly on their knees. They were glad to be at the end of their journey. But the baby camel wanted to know what they'd come all this long way for and what it was all about. And so he followed the wise men into the house where the child was, and went right up to him, and the baby Christ put his hand on the camel's head and blessed him. And he became good and sweet and kind and very fond of children. You know, camels are usually mean. They kick and bite. They're very ugly beasts. But this little camel is sweet-tempered and very fond of children. And on the eve of Epiphany, children in Syria put out a dish of sweetened honey water and expect to receive their gifts from the baby camel who walked to Jesus.